Elon Musk says, I have been for 2 hours to tell you. This is a joke. Elon Musk stood in the center of the room, his voice cutting through the silence like a poorly tuned rocket engine. I have been for 2 hours to tell you this. This is a joke. The room fell silent, as if the entire atmosphere of Earth had forgotten how to vibrate with sound. It wasn't a boardroom, not a stage, not even a proper room. It was more like the inside of an unfinished idea. A white fog suspended in endless suspension, where chairs were implied but not built, and a table existed only because everyone agreed there should be one. He stood tall, slightly awkward, as if his body hadn't been delivered from the factory with the full software update yet, and repeated, 2 hours. Me here. Joke. He smiled, but not the kind of smile you expect from a billionaire. It was the smile of someone who had been hiding in the corner of the universe, waiting to drop a punchline so cosmic that every atom would giggle simultaneously. Nobody laughed. The audience wasn't even human in the normal sense. It was a collection of possibilities. There was a man who was definitely a banker, but also definitely a giraffe wearing a suit if you tilted your head at the right angle. There was a woman who flickered between being a scientist and a sandwich. A small child who seemed to be made entirely of Wi-Fi signals raised her hand and asked, was the joke the waiting, or is the waiting the joke? Elon squinted as if trying to locate which sector of Mars her question had come from, then said, yes. And so it began, the great unraveling of seriousness. Because when someone like Elon Musk says something is a joke, reality tends to bend itself to comply. 1 minute the fog room was still misty, and the next it was a Tesla factory, but all the cars were made of bread, soft, sourdough exteriors with interiors of rye and dashboards of gluten-free oat. Workers ran around with butter in tool belts, smearing windshields with jam. And every time one of the bread cars honked, pigeons flew out of the hood. This is innovation, Elon said, patting a baguette fender. This is the future. Do you understand now? It was a joke all along. Cars were a joke. Bread is serious. Again, nobody laughed, but not because it wasn't funny. It was too funny, too enormous. The kind of joke that requires an entire civilization to process before releasing even a chuckle. Somewhere in the distance, the pyramids of Giza sighed, as if finally understanding what they'd been built for. Somewhere on Neptune, a storm paused for 1 millisecond to smirk. Jokes of this scale cannot be immediately recognized. They ripple through existence, updating firmware in the souls of every organism until one day, long after someone sneezes and giggles, and that is the delayed laughter of the universe catching up. The giraffe banker said, but Elon, why 2 hours? Why not 3 or 10 or instantly? Elon pulled out a pocket watch, except it wasn't a watch, but a tiny rocket ship orbiting a marble of cheese inside a glass dome. Time, he said, is expensive. I bought 2 hours at a discount. You wouldn't believe what minutes cost these days. I've been negotiating with time for months. Finally, I managed to rent 2 hours and use them to tell you this joke. He tapped the glass dome, and the rocket inside honked like a goose before flying into his ear. By now, the child made of Wi-Fi had begun to glow. Her body emitted router signals in all directions, and suddenly everyone had excellent internet. The sandwich scientist looked up from a clipboard made of lettuce and said, "Connection achieved. The audience is live." And just like that, people began streaming in from everywhere. Humans, aliens, confused refrigerators, grandmothers from the year 2090, cats wearing monocles, ghosts who thought they were still in the queue for the afterlife, all drawn to this moment, this declaration that something as immense as existence itself could be a joke. "Let me explain," Elon said, lifting a baguette car door and using it as a chalkboard. He scribbled equations, but instead of numbers and letters, he drew stick figures, laughing, crying, eating noodles, falling downstairs. "You see, jokes are the fundamental particles of the universe." Quarks? No, photons, please. Everything is made of setups and punchlines. The Big Bang was simply the first joke, an explosion of timing and absurdity. Galaxies are cosmic giggles. Black holes are punchlines so dense they suck in even the possibility of explanation. He paused to sip water from a glass that was actually a small aquarium with a goldfish performing stand-up comedy inside. The banker giraffe raised his hoof hand. "So what you're saying is existence itself is a long-form bit?" Elon nodded gravely. "Yes. A joke that takes billions of years to land. We are in the setup right now. The punchline will come, but you must be patient. That's why I waited 2 hours to demonstrate. Timing is everything." People started nodding. The sandwich scientist scribbled furiously on her clipboard, lettuce leaves fluttering. The child router buzzed with a stronger signal, now broadcasting free Wi-Fi to the entire Andromeda galaxy. A pigeon from one of the bread cars landed on Elon's shoulder and whispered the stock prices for next Thursday. Elon laughed, which made the pigeon explode into confetti. But here's the thing about a joke so large, so cosmic, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The fog room, the bread cars, the surreal audience, they all started to ripple, glitch, change. Reality began bending into something less rigid. A man in the corner turned into a question mark and wandered away. A woman laughed so hard she became two women, one still laughing, and one made entirely of the echo of that laugh. A tree sprouted in the middle of the bread factory, bearing fruit that were just little speech bubbles containing, "ha." When they fell, they popped like balloons, leaving the smell of popcorn. Elon kept going. "You think Mars is about colonization? Wrong. Mars is the setup. Earth is the premise. The punchline will be Jupiter. You think Dogecoin is currency? Wrong. Dogecoin is punctuation, the comma before the twist. Twitter, or as I call it, X, is not social media. It's an intergalactic open mic. You think I am serious? Wrong. I am the straight man in the biggest comedy duo of all time. My partner? The void." He gestured upward, and the ceiling peeled away, revealing not stars but a massive cosmic audience. Entities so large their laughs took centuries to echo. Some of them already had tears in their eyes, waiting for the final punchline. And as he spoke, something strange began happening to the listeners. They started remembering all the jokes they'd forgotten. A man suddenly recalled the silly riddle his father told him when he was 5, and he wept because it had been the most important gift of his childhood. A cat remembered the joy of knocking over a glass of water and realized that act had always been a cosmic stand-up set. A ghost remembered how it died laughing and finally understood why. Even the giraffe banker felt a tickle in his elongated throat and coughed out a chuckle. The child router asked again, "But what if the joke isn't funny?" Elon looked at her, eyes serious for the first time. "Then we laugh anyway, because the universe doesn't care about funny. The universe cares about timing. You ever notice how sometimes you drop something and it bounces in a way that makes you laugh, even though nothing about it is objectively funny? That's the universe testing its material on you. We are the laugh track of creation." And as if to prove his point, a man tripped over absolutely nothing and fell in slow motion. His tie spun like a helicopter blade, and the entire fog erupted in laughter that turned into thunder, then into rain, then into seeds falling into the soil of possibility. The seeds grew into jokes themselves: knock-knock trees, pun bushes, sarcastic vines, ironic mushrooms, absurdist sunflowers. Every plant whispered something ridiculous as it swayed, and people picked them and laughed, eating humor directly like fruit. Still, Elon wasn't finished. He climbed into one of the bread cars, which immediately started rolling forward, powered not by gasoline or electricity, but by anticipation. The audience followed, marching through the fog that had now become an infinite stage. He drove them forward, narrating as he went. This was the test. This was the rehearsal. I wanted to see if you could handle 2 hours of setup. Now we begin the long joke: 10,000 years. A billion setups. An eternity of punchlines. The bread car accelerated, though accelerated was an imperfect word in this context, because speed was relative and also politely asked for permission before moving. The tires, which were actually pretzel wheels with sesame seeds for traction, squeaked a little giggle as they rolled over the invisible asphalt of possibility. Elon waved to the audience, now following in a procession of improbable vehicles, pasta gondolas, jellyfish-powered scooters, and a fleet of quantum skateboards that existed in 3 dimensions, none of which aligned with each other. "Everyone," he shouted over the chorus of squeaks and hums. "Brace yourselves. This is not merely a joke. This is an orchestral suite of absurdity. The kind of joke that takes centuries to finish. Yet, you are all part of it." Right now, the fog room had stretched into a hallway that wound like a Mobius strip, twisting through past, present, and hypothetical futures. Along the walls were framed portraits of historical figures, all caught mid-laugh: Aristotle with a hiccup, Cleopatra nearly choking on a grape, Einstein's hair flaring into a perfect joke halo, Newton dodging an apple that insisted on turning into a rubber chicken mid-fall. The frames wobbled, occasionally tipping off the walls and floating gently upwards like curious balloons. "Observe," Elon said, pointing at a slightly bent frame of Leonardo da Vinci drawing a cat wearing a monocle. "History has always been absurd, but most of you missed it because you were busy being serious. Now we correct that oversight." The audience gasped. Or maybe they laughed. Or perhaps both happened simultaneously. And in the universe's attempt to comply, space-time itself hiccuped. Somewhere nearby, a small black hole opened and expelled confetti, which rained down like a cosmic ticker tape parade. One of the confetti pieces hit the giraffe banker on the nose, transforming him briefly into a giraffe-sized dandelion before he shrugged and resumed being a banker. The child router buzzed in approval, her Wi-Fi signals projecting memes that made distant galaxies smile. As the procession advanced, the scenery continued to mutate. Mountains sprouted legs and began dancing. Rivers climbed trees and sang opera. Clouds wrote sarcastic commentary on the state of weather in invisible ink. And the sun began juggling moons for fun. Elon remained remarkably calm, his smile now a subtle curve that suggested he knew punchlines no one else could imagine. "See," he said, "everything is part of the joke. Gravity, comedy, seasons, timing, political debates, improvised theater, the stock market, a series of escalating pratfalls." A passerby who was simultaneously a philosopher and a loaf of rye bread raised a question. If this is a joke, does it have a punchline, or is it infinite? Elon's eyes twinkled with that strange half-serious, half-mischievous glow that humans would later misinterpret as charisma. "Ah," he said, tapping the bread philosopher gently with a baguette. "The beauty of a cosmic joke is that the punchline exists, but it's distributed. You, me, everyone, every particle carries it. Sometimes the punchline is so subtle that you only notice it when a pigeon sneezes and invents a new color. Just then, a pigeon wearing a tiny top hat and carrying a briefcase of interstellar contracts indeed sneezed. A brilliant shade of neon lavender burst into existence, then shimmered across the sky like a watercolor painting made of sound. The audience gasped, laughed, and applauded all at once, not entirely sure which reaction was appropriate. Elon nodded solemnly. "Timing, people. Timing is everything." The bread cars and pasta gondolas continued their procession through this ever-shifting landscape. Each turn revealed more improbable wonders, a library where the books read themselves aloud, but each word was a pun, a waterfall flowing with sparkling lemonade, inhabited by rubber duck philosophers, a cityscape where skyscrapers were stacked teacups and taxis were hummingbirds wearing bow ties. The audience wandered through it in awe, laughing at absurdities, realizing that their brains had been upgraded for a level of humor previously unthinkable. Elon, standing atop a particularly large baguette car, raised his arms. "Do you feel it? The layers of meaning, the depth of timing, the subtle genius hidden in plain sight. This is why I spent 2 hours telling you a joke. You had to arrive here fully prepared, mentally elastic, receptive to the infinite absurdity. Otherwise, you would have missed it." A voice emerged from the crowd, though it sounded like a chorus of everything that ever made anyone laugh at anything. "But Elon, what happens if we don't get it? What if we fail to laugh?" Elon turned slowly, the breeze from his improbable vehicles rustling the air in waves of invisible musical notes. Then he said, "The universe politely waits. Jokes do not demand compliance. They merely exist, persisting patiently until you are ready. Sometimes centuries pass, sometimes lifetimes. But the joke will eventually land." And when it does, the impact is so profound that reality itself giggles. At that moment, reality giggled. The entire landscape shivered with delight. Mountains doubled over, rivers rolled into fits of mirth, and even the sky twinkled with what could only be described as cosmic chuckles. The audience laughed in response, not out of humor alone, but because the act of participating in the joke was itself exhilarating. Each laugh created ripples, expanding the joke further, touching parts of the universe that had never considered humor. Meanwhile, Elon continued his philosophical expedition through absurdity. Consider, he said, the phenomenon of repetition. 2 hours might seem long. 10,000 years might seem longer, but in the context of a joke that spans galaxies, repetition becomes musical. The same punchline can appear in countless forms: a falling apple, a slip on a banana peel, a stock market crash, each a reflection, a riff on the original. And when you begin to notice the patterns, the humor becomes enlightenment. You begin to see that existence itself is a comedy club, and you are both audience and performer. The audience absorbed this, nodding, laughing, occasionally turning into objects that were themselves jokes: chairs, clocks, cats, toast, sentient Wi-Fi signals. Each transformation was temporary, fleeting, but utterly delightful. Elon smiled at this chaotic orchestra of absurdity, then produced a small blackboard from seemingly nowhere. On it, he began to draw a flowchart connecting galaxies, subatomic particles, and memes, all linked by arrows labeled punchline or setup. The giraffe banker tried to comprehend, but his neck kept bending in existential confusion. The sandwich scientist took notes, jotting down equations in lettuce that somehow described the probability of cosmic laughter. By now, the procession had reached a bridge made of spaghetti, suspended over a lake of liquid chocolate that contained tiny islands made of fortune cookies. "Do not eat the bridge," Elon warned. "Unless you want to become part of the punchline." Naturally, several audience members immediately took bites, vanishing into the ether with muffled laughter, only to reappear moments later, giggling, now slightly glowing and reciting limericks that had not yet been invented. Elon continued, "Observe the principle of escalation. Jokes do not exist in isolation. They build layer upon layer, forming a complex lattice of absurdity. What seems trivial, like a pigeon sneezing, becomes monumental when placed in the right context. The Big Bang, a sneeze, human history, one long chain of setups and punchlines, the stock market, slapstick, your laughter, evidence of universal resonance." The child router floated beside him, her signals now broadcasting entire sitcoms across light years. Alien civilizations tuned in, laughing at the same jokes humans had been missing for millennia. A meteor passed by containing a stand-up routine performed by sentient comets. Each punchline was written in tail dust. Elon clapped along, nodding approvingly. And through it all, the fog room that had once been undefined now seemed less like a room and more like a stage for the universe's longest-running joke. Every participant, every particle, every stray idea that had wandered into existence was a collaborator, unwittingly contributing to the layers of absurdity. Elon paused, looking at his audience, now an eclectic mix of beings, objects, and ideas, and said, "Do you understand now?" It was never about the punchline alone. It was about participation, about recognizing the joke and becoming part of it. I spent 2 hours preparing to tell you this, but the joke has been unfolding since the beginning of time. And at that, the bread car leapt over the chocolate lake, sailing through air that was suddenly made of jelly, and the entire crowd followed in a ballet of improbable vehicles, laughing as galaxies pirouetted alongside them, joining in the eternal performance of humor that defined existence itself. And as Elon's laughter echoed across galaxies, stretching through time and bending reality itself, everyone finally understood that the joke was never meant to end. It had always been the universe, laughing through them all. Elon's laughter did not clash with the room's momentum, it fused with it. The fog, the bread cars, the surreal audience, everything began to ripple, glitch, and morph. A man in the corner turned into a question mark and wandered away. A woman laughed so hard she split into two, one half still laughing, the other an echo of that laugh. A tree sprouted in the bread factory, bearing fruit that were speech bubbles containing "ha." They burst into scent of popcorn when they popped. "See?" Elon said, a chalk in hand, "everything is part of the joke. This is a test, a rehearsal. I wanted to see if you could endure 2 hours of setup. Now we begin the long joke." The procession moved forward on a road of impossibilities, a baguette car, a pasta gondola, jellyfish-powered scooters, quantum skateboards that existed in misaligned dimensions. Brace yourselves. This is not merely a joke. It's an orchestral suite of absurdity, he proclaimed. The fog became a hallway through time and hypothetical futures. Portraits on the walls, Aristotle hiccuping, Cleopatra choking on a grape, Einstein's hair erupting into a joke halo, Newton dodging a rubber chicken apple, began to wobble and float. History, once solemn, corrected itself with a wink. "Absurdity has always lived in plain sight," Elon announced, "you just missed it through seriousness." Space itself hiccuped a cosmic ticker tape as confetti rained from a distant black hole. The giraffe banker briefly turned into a dandelion, then resumed his banker duties. The child router kept pulsing with signals, spreading memes that coaxed galaxies to smile. The bread car procession drew closer to a bridge of spaghetti, arched over a lake of chocolate that housed islands of fortune cookies. "Do not eat the bridge unless you want to become part of the punchline," Elon warned. Some did, and vanished, reappearing moments later glowing and reciting as yet.